Well, we have at long last come to the start of Nintendo Power's 9th year, though we're at June of 1996, and as of this issue, the launch of the N64 is still several months off in September, assuming it doesn't get delayed again. So, we are covering issue 85, again for June of 1996. Our cover game this issue is Mario 64. It's definitely not getting a full article this issue. It's more being done as part of a overall N64 upcoming title spotlight. Particularly again, since the N64 isn't out at least until the fall, as of the printing of this issue of Nintendo Power, but it's definitely taking the lead on coverage this issue. Again, particularly as releases are slowing. This issue's letter column has a letter with high praise for the Virtual Boy and a response from the editors which promises titles that never materialize. We also have our obligatory ranking of the competition, this time on the PlayStation, because we need to perpetuate immature, petulant console warring that will persist into the present day and arguably helped lead to the rise of Goobergob. I'm not going to say the actual name because if I say it, they'll show up in the comments and try to harass any women who enjoy watching my channel, and I don't want that. But yeah, it leads to that petulant crap. Finally, we have a letter bemoaning the name change of the Nesters, which I say right on. They're still the Nesters to me, damn it. I'm saying that because I appreciated the continuity and remembering the history of Nintendo Power and all the fun comics with the character in the past. Anyway, moving on. In the Power charts, we have 2 new games entering the charts at long last, one on the Super Nintendo, very late entry here, and one for the Game Boy, Ken Griffey Jr.'s Winning Run and Tetris Blast, respectively. Our genre ranking for this issue is Tournament Fighters. Not fighting games, but tournament fighters. And it's almost exclusively not just fighting games, but Mortal Kombat games in particular. And due to this issue's the formatting of this section, it is almost completely illegible. Come on, guys. You can do better than that. The opening article of this issue, and arguably the cover story, is a preview of the N64. As I mentioned earlier, the console has been pushed back to September, so there aren't a lot of any Super Nintendo games coming out right now. So, to a degree, this is Nintendo Power stalling for time. In any case, we open off with another preview of Super Mario 64, this time focusing on the game controls and how it handles platforming and movement and all of that in 3 dimensions, before moving on into several other launch titles, each preview focused on one particular aspect of the game. For example, the preview of Blast Corps focuses on the game's destructible environments, mostly destructible environments. For Shadows of the Empire, it's the verisimilitude of the game's levels and building a cohesive setting. For Doom 64, it's how the new lighting works out in there, and the brand new levels for the game. For GoldenEye 64, it's about how this game kind of gives its own separate spin on first-person shooters for the N64 and with the actual use of 3D and so forth. And for Cruisin' USA, it's how the game is actually improved from the arcade version. And this all wraps up with developer profiles of Rare and of Williams, with particular focus here on what they're doing for the N64 and their reactions to the system. Our first actual game this issue is the Super Nintendo version of Olympic Summer Games, with a rundown of the various events in the game, with all of the same events from the Game Boy version, just with a different camera perspective in an attempt to replicate the feel of TV broadcasts. More or less. The Super Nintendo version of Olympic Summer Games is a much less enjoyable game than the Game Boy version. It feels like the camera perspective, using this isometric view, makes things trickier to pull off, and additionally, it feels like the AI players are much better at doing the sort of like alternating mash that the game requires you to do for running and that sort of thing, in order to do the aerobic, the athletic part of track and field events outside of doing the jump. If I was to give an explanation for this as a guess, my suspicion is that because the Super Nintendo supports multiplayer much better than the Game Boy version does, the developers put less work into balancing the AI performance because they are operating from the assumption of you would be having friends that you'd be playing this with, whether siblings or having family members over or college roommates or what have you, as opposed to the Game Boy, where there was the very real possibility that you're just playing this by yourself on a car trip. Next up is Izzy's Quest for the Olympic Rings, a mascot platformer based around the Atlanta Olympic Games mascot. Izzy's Quest for the Olympic Rings is pretty much a mediocre Amiga-grade platformer, complete with controls that are basically set up for a 2-button joystick. It's really basic and just difficult enough to control with random and arbitrary places for damage that makes it just a little too frustrating to be worth your time, and it's not enough of an interesting failure to have where I have anything really interesting to say or involved to speak of about it. In Epic Center news, we have some discussion of fantasy RPGs on the Game Boy, which is important for them to really bring up, since more and more Super Nintendo RPG developers are currently jumping ship or are about to jump ship to the PlayStation, where they can put more data on CDs for less cost than for putting that on a cartridge, and they can also aren't necessarily locked into using 3D environments in the same way that they would be on the N64. Next up is Dragonheart, an action RPG for the Game Boy based on the fantasy film starring Dennis Quaid as a dragon-slaying knight in medieval Britain and co-starring Sean Connery as the voice of a dragon, which is made for the Game Boy. So yeah, this article has maps of each of the game's areas. So, confession time here, I couldn't get this game to run. It just wouldn't load past the copyright screen. So I'm going to have to give this game a miss. I'm actually interested to check this game out, not just because there's not a lot of games to cover this issue, but I'm kind of out of luck here, so yeah. Our fourth and final game, or I guess technically third game we'll be reviewing this issue, is a sequel to one of the first RPGs that I covered for the Game Boy that was featured in this magazine, Sword of Hope 2. This article is maps for the first few areas. If it looks less focused, or at least less super detailed, it's because this game, like the first one, isn't super detailed in terms of its level environments. So, Sword of Hope 2 is pretty rote and also kind of grindy. It's moving around less like a very detailed dungeon map setup like what you'd have for, say, your wizardry, and more going hotspot to hotspot type movement, like with, Shadowgate and other similar adventure games. Same way that the first Sword of Hope was. So this is par for the course. Though this one doesn't have necessarily the cheap deaths that really either of those type works can entail, either from like quick kill monsters with like unblockable super attacks and that sort of thing that kill you in hits, or with the sort of pixel bitchy environments and puzzles from the Shadowgate series. It's decent enough, and to the game's credit, it lets you more or less save anywhere, though just one slot, but it also doesn't have any real necessarily significant character choice, so that's also okay. Or narrative choice, I should say. Which, all of this fits the criteria for what I want in a Game Boy game, especially an RPG. It's something that works, something that works for both long road trips, where you're sitting in the back seat or passenger seat or what have you, or situations where you are sitting and waiting for an appointment, and so you're just on a little spot and you have to stop playing when your appointment has arrived, or I should say, you're called in for your appointment, or for that matter, if you're on a bus and your stop has come up, that sort of thing. It fits those two niches for what you need for stuff to play, or for where you would be playing mobile games, so well done there. This issue, the guide for Lufia 2 continues, and once again, as I've already reviewed this game, I'm just going to put a link to that episode in the doobly-doo. In the RPG strategy column, we have more coverage for Final Fantasy III, with a particular focus on how to get some of the game's special items, particularly ones that are related to drops from particular monsters or revisiting certain areas at certain times. The guide coverage for Mohawk and Headphone Jack continues with some more maps for the later levels of the game. And again, this is one of the situations where it's probably better off, if you're viewing this scans of this issue, to view them in a reader that makes it really easy for you to rotate the map. Since otherwise, if you had an actual physical magazine, you could rotate it to your heart's content, which you would absolutely need to do because of how this game works. In the Now Playing column, Titus is releasing a whole bunch of games that they previously shelved because now there's a whole bunch of openings in the release schedule thanks to the delays of the N64 release, so we might as well take advantage of them and strike while the iron is hot. And finally, in Pak Watch, Nintendo has a few big Super Nintendo games left. Donkey Kong Country 3 and Kirby's Superstar. So, this issue, my pick is Sword of Hope 2, somewhat by default, as it is the most competent game on display this issue. The rest of it, like the our mascot platformer based on the 96 Atlanta Summer Games mascot is okay, but is a little rough in a lot of respects. The actual 96 Olympic Summer Games game is clearly designed and intended to be played with other people as opposed to being played solo against the AI with how the balance is set up and that sort of thing. It's much more of a sort of party-based thing. That's pretty much how things shake out, is Sort of Hope to succeed at being a game you can play solo for card trips and for waiting on the bus or on a or in a waiting room or that sort of thing, which succeeds at doing the things that a handheld console game need to be capable of doing. So it kind of wins by default. Next month, we're getting into some more stalling for time as we continue to wait for the actual launch of the N64 with more preview coverage to come with it. And in the process, in Epic Center, we end up getting a fairly high profile, I would say, import title covered. We've had the first of the Tales games covered once before, and this time we're having a title from a related developer, I will say. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks, also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.